Hi, now that we have covered some of the basic concepts of the digestive system, we will start to discuss about different parts of it. In this and next video, we will look at their anatomy and physiology, progressing part by part, following the path of the food that it takes in the digestive tract. So why don't we get started by looking at the very first part? And I would like to begin by asking you that where does the digestion start? And of course, it is the mouth and associated structures that most textbooks and students offer as an answer. But I would take a step even further back and say that it may be even before that. It is the sight, smell, and so on that trigger salivation. And saliva itself contains digestive enzymes, such as salivary amylase that breaks down the starch. So I guess that one could say that the digestion can start even before the food makes it to the mouth. So let's think of a mouth in a general level beyond its role in the digestive system. What is a mouth an important structure for? Well, of course, we had the fact that this is where the food enters the digestive system, but it is also playing an important role in our communication through speech and also as a sensory receptor site. We evaluate if something is fit to be eaten, or in case of developmental psychology, a child explores much of its early world through the mouth, right? And some of the terms that can be used to discuss this structure are oral and buccal cavity. I think we should also define the borders of the mouth. So anteriorly, it is the lips that define the border. And laterally, this is on the sides. It is the cheeks that are an area of important structure. Without them, the food would fall out of the mouth. The roof of the mouth is formed by the soft and hard palate, with the hard being more anterior and soft more posterior. And then inferiorly, a tongue plays a major role. Note how tongue is actually much larger than we often think of. And of course, posteriorly, it would be oropharynx. And one more term that I do want to introduce here is the oral vestibule. The term vestibule refers to the chamber. So it is the space between the teeth and gums and the lips. So let's discuss a little bit about the tongue. Notice that the tongue itself is composed of integrated bundles of skeletal muscle. So manipulating the shape and position of the tongue depends greatly on what muscle groups are being used. Another thing to highlight here is the term papillae. These are small rounded projections on the tongue. And then the term frenulum. It refers to this small ridge or fold that connects the tongue to the floor of the mouth. Sometimes frenulum can be cut when a baby has trouble with latching. There is frenulum also more anteriorly within the vestibule of the lower jaw and also on the upper jaw. Another interesting structure that we see here is the hanging projection at the back of the mouth, known as uvula. And I often feel bad because we only show you average healthy young people's anatomy in these courses, because there is much more variation in what you will really end up seeing. So therefore, I have a bit of a curiosity to show here. A bifid uvula, which means an uvula that has divided in two. So next, let's talk about saliva. Saliva is important for us for many reasons. It cleanses the mouth. It also dissolves food chemicals so that they are available for taste to detect. Further, saliva moistens the food in mouth so that we can form it into this solid ball-like structure that is easier to swallow. And saliva is responsible for the food breakdown, starting already at the level of the mouth, as salivary amylase enzymes start to break down starches. And there are two types of salivary glands. Most of the saliva is produced by the major salivary glands, which are located outside the mouth. And then there are some minor salivary glands which do not contribute that much. We will be focusing on the extrinsic ones, so outside the mouth. These were the major ones. And we will use this listing to assist us as we review these. So the first one that we will have a look of is the parotid salivary gland. This is located next to the ear above the masseter muscle, which you might remember from our review of muscles of mastication of the face area. A good way to remember its name is that a parrot sits on the shoulder of a pirate. So the parotid gland is roughly where it would be placed. And this gland produces very serous secretions, meaning that it is fairly watery. And these are released at the top part of the mouth next to the second molar. The next one that we will have a look of is going to be the submandibular salivary gland. This is located within the mandible, more or less medially, and it releases its secretions next to the base of the lingual frenulum. Remember the small fold or ridge in the base of the tongue that we had a look of earlier? So right next to it. The secretion of mandibular gland is a mix of serous and mucus. Finally, let's have a look of the sublingual salivary gland. As the name suggests, it's located under the tongue. This one opens at several points at the floor of the mouth, and its secretions are mucus. So how much saliva do you produce per day? It's about 1,500 milliliters, so about 0.4 gallons, which to me seems like quite a big amount. Well, saliva is mostly water, about 97 to 99.5%. It is just slightly acidic, so just below pH 7. Saliva contains several electrolytes, as well as salivary amylase and lingual lipase. There are also proteins and some metabolic wastes like urea and uric acid. Now, let's have a look of teeth, just quickly. I know that in this class we have quite a few students who are thinking of a career in a medical field that involves this. So, we have primary teeth, which are sometimes known as milk teeth or baby teeth. And then we have secondary permanent teeth. While we have 20 primary teeth, the number of permanent teeth is 32. And dentistry may be the field to go to, as although we are taking better care of our teeth, people have also a longer life expectancy than ever before. So maintaining teeth is very important for us, and there is some good money to be exchanged in that field. And classifying teeth is actually quite easy. Just divide the mouth into 4 areas where they are all repeated in. So all you have to do is to study 1/4. Let's have a look at this. So incisors are located at the very front, anteriorly. And there is 2 of them in a single quarter, so 8 in total. These are especially well adjusted to things like biting an apple. So chisel-shaped teeth, ideal for cutting. Canines are teeth that are ideal for tearing or piercing food stuff. There are 4 of them in total, so 1 per quarter. Then premolars. There are 2 in each quarter, so 8 in total. And sometimes they are known as bicuspids. Their shape is having a broad crown with rounded cusps. This makes them ideal for grinding and crushing food. And finally, molars. We have 12 of these in total, so that makes 3 per a single quarter. And again, they can be described as having broad crowns and rounded cusps, excellent for grinding. And when upper and lower jaw meet, these create a significant force. We are not going to spend a lot of time looking at the structure of a tooth, but as you can see, it can be divided roughly into portions. The part above the gum is known as the crown, and it contains enamel, which is the hardest or one of the hardest substances in the body. We also have dentin, which forms the bulk of the tooth, and then finally a central canal where the blood vessels, nerves, and connective tissue are located. The part below the gum is known as the root. There, the cementum does what the name suggests. It cements the tooth into its socket. And we also have periodontal ligament, which further anchors the teeth to the jawbone. So I think that we have now talked quite a bit about the mouth. Let's continue our review of alimentary canal and move along from this region. So the next one that we have is pharynx. We talked about it quite a bit when we covered the respiratory system. Now we do not need to worry about nasopharynx as it is reserved only for the air, but we are interested in oro and laryngopharynx. These are where both food and air passes. After these comes oesophagus. This is just a muscle tube, about the length of 25 centimeters. So that would be something like 9 to 10 inches. It has very little digestive function, but rather just connects the lower laryngopharynx to the stomach. What is interesting is, though, that as it is a muscular tube, it helps to move food or drinks to the stomach regardless on what position we're at. So rather interestingly, you can drink water while standing on your head, and the water will move up to the stomach even against the gravity, thanks to the peristaltic waves which we saw earlier. Same goes for being able to drink and eat in space where there is no gravity. One thing that I do want to make a note about at this point is that when food and saliva have been mixed in the mouth, we have already done some mechanical breaking of the food and formed a ball that is easier to swallow and pass to the stomach. Well, we no longer talk about the food, but about bolus. This is a mix of food and saliva that makes this ball that is easier to manipulate in the digestive tract. And what is actually quite interesting is that if we look at the microscopic image of the oesophagus, we can still see the same layers that we discussed at the beginning of our review of the digestive system. Mucosa, which protected structures. Note that there is no crossing of material in oesophagus. Submucosa, the layer below the mucosa, and muscular layer, which facilitated this wave-like movement of peristalsis. Note that we also have serosa, or sometimes also known as adventitia. There. And we remember that its role was to anchor the structure to its base. Next, I will introduce a fancy word, deglutition. What does that mean? Well, it just means swallowing. And let's look at the swallowing process a little bit. First, the soft palate and uvula move up, sealing off the nasal cavity. Then the epiglottis closes off the trachea so that the food or liquid swallowed does not go by accident to the lungs. This is followed by the throat jumping up anteriorly so that it can catch the bolus. And then the bolus just travels down the oesophagus where the peristaltic movements carry it. Well, my question is for you that is swallowing voluntary or involuntary process? Well, turns out it is first voluntary, but once initiated, it cannot be stopped, so it becomes involuntary. Now we are ready to talk about stomach. It is this slightly J-shaped structure, about 25 to 30 centimeters in size, so like from 10 to 12 inches. Stomach is located below the diaphragm, so the oesophagus has to go through the diaphragm, through an opening. In terms of the location, stomach is located at the upper left part of the abdominal cavity. If we think of the function of the stomach, it's not much more than a temporary storage site for what has now become from bolus to chyme. The term chyme refers to this paste-like mass, which is more liquid than the bolus. Now it is a mixture of more than just food and saliva, but also contains stomach secretions. Often we see pictures of or diagrams of stomach where it is perfectly smooth and ball-like structure that is completely full. But in reality, it is more empty most of the time and not quite this smooth or rounded as a structure. Another thing to note is that when it is empty, we will see rugae on its inner surface. These are folds which facilitate this significant growth in volume that can take place when an empty stomach is distended to become full. And what I want to talk about next is the different parts of the stomach. Let's have a look at that. And you can see that the stomach starts from where the oesophagus ends and ends where the small intestines begin. So we will talk about all the parts in between these. So the first one that I want us to note is the part where esophagus joins the stomach. This is known as the cardia. And above that, so more superior, is the part that we call fundus. This part is important for us to know because sometimes there may be air in the stomach, and this is where it would build up to. We see this especially in medical imaging. And then we have the largest part of the stomach known as body. Then this is followed by pylorus, which is the last part of the stomach. And there are actually two parts here, pyloric antrum followed by pyloric canal. Let's talk a little bit about what else we can add to this diagram. Well, there must be some way to control both ends of the stomach. And this is with sphincters. Where esophagus joins the cardia, we have something known as the lower esophageal sphincter. This prevents the backflow of the stomach acids into esophagus. Sometimes this fails and we may get heartburn. So nothing to do with the heart, rather it is stomach acid irritating esophagus. Some cases for this may be, for example, excess food or drink, obesity, pregnancy, or even running. If this is prolonged and unattended, we may end up with esophageal ulcers. And if even then continued, these may develop into cancerous. So attend to the regular heartburns. I do want to highlight regarding the lower esophageal sphincter that it is more of a physiological than an anatomical sphincter. And then we have, of course, another sphincter at the other end, and this is known as the pyloric sphincter. This is located just before the small intestines and controls when and how much chyme is being let to move in there. Just a few more terms that I want to introduce. We have a lesser curvature and a greater curvature of the stomach. And this is a good time for us to mention hernia. There are different kinds of hernia, but the main gist to take away from this is that an organ bulges out from somewhere where it should not be bulging through. And one quite common one is hernia of the stomach through diaphragm. You might remember that when we talked about the muscular layers in the digestive system, I mentioned that there is something special about the stomach. And I mentioned that stomach is kind of a special one as it has a third type, oblique muscle fibers. This allows even more distension and mixing, which consequently are important functions of the stomach. Now, let's do a little physiology and talk about the secretions of the stomach. What we find is that the stomach is lined with simple columnar epithelium. And among there are gastric pits. These are then these depressions that we can see here like this. And all the way down there, we have gastric glands, which produce gastric juice as a secretion. In fact, about 3 liters of this is produced every day. What I have done next is to condense all of the important information about stomach secretions in one summary slide. So let's go through it together step by step as usual. So the first one that we will look at is pepsinogen. It is secreted from the chief cells, but it remains as inactive. So doesn't do much unless we need to have hydrochloric acid present. And this we get from the parietal cells. Well, the presence of hydrochloric acid activates pepsinogen, making it pepsin, which is an active form and responsible for protein splitting. Another thing that happens due to the hydrochloric acid is that gastric lipase, which is responsible for splitting fats, remember lipids, this is secreted from the sheep cells. But it remains weak due to the pH in stomach, which is due to the hypochloric acid. So gastric lipase will reach its full efficiency in fat splitting only at the small intestines, where pH conditions are neutralized. Now, another thing that we have to consider is that how come the hydrochloric acid does not dissolve the stomach wall? Well, goblet cells and mucus glands secrete mucus, which protects the wall of the stomach. And finally, the last one that I want to mention is our intrinsic factor. This one is secreted from the parietal cells, and it plays a key role in vitamin B12 absorption. So there you have it, our major stomach secretions and their roles, all summarized in one slide. And now I think it would be interesting to consider, what if the stomach layer is broken? And in this case, we have, of course, an ulcer. These are caused by a damage to the stomach wall, and this can be due to stomach acid, certain bacteria, or, for example, aspirin, which is a strong anti-inflammatory pain reliever. So that's why we need to be careful about aspirin. What else? Well, there can be upper abdominal pain, but it can be also symptomless. So what can we do? We will try to decrease the stomach acid production with certain drugs. And if there has been bacteria involved, we will use antibiotics. So that's it. I think that next we should look at the phases of secretion of gastric juices. Let's discuss this just briefly. So what happens in the first phase is that just the sight, thinking of, or scent or taste triggers the cephalic phase reflex. This gives rise to the gastric phase, which lasts 3 to 4 hours and results in release of gastric juice. Some things that can stimulate this are distension of the stomach, as well as certain chemicals like proteins, caffeine, and so on. On the contrary, low pH, for example, would inhibit this phase. Then finally, at the intestinal phase, there is first a stimulation and then inhibition. The stimulation would be the food entering the intestine, which encourages the production. However, inhibition is by wall of small intestines, and especially duodenum being stretched, acidity of small intestines, and fatty content. The last one is because fat takes longer time to digest. So this inhibition keeps the amount of material in small intestines manageable. Now I think that we should finish off with a consideration of why the stomach is not well adapted to absorption. What explanation can you think? Well, some that I would put forward include the acidic environment of the stomach, which prevented activation of many digestive secretions. Also, the lack of villi in the stomach surface means that there is less surface area for this absorption. And then, of course, we have a mucus layer which prevented absorption through it. Therefore, we will note that the main site of absorption will be the small intestine. And just as we are about to finish this video, I want to remind us about the important terminology so that we use the correct word for correct locations. When the food was mechanically manipulated and mixed with saliva in the mouth, it became bolus. Then when bolus is mixed with gastric juice in the stomach, it now becomes chyme. And as we remove water from the chyme, as you will see in the next video, it becomes feces. I hope that this summary makes sense. So let's wrap up this video here, and in the next video we will continue this journey of the food. We will look at the small intestine and large intestine and also discuss 3 important accessory organs: liver, gallbladder, and pancreas. I will see you then.